A streamer in Kazakhstan locked his girlfriend in a closet, starved her for weeks, and when she finally collapsed on camera, he asked his viewers if he should call an ambulance or let her die. They paid him to wait. But he's not the worst on this list. Case 6. A musician used his fame to manipulate underage girls into sending him explicit videos, turning their bedrooms into crime scenes. Case 7. A mother built a children's YouTube empire while her kids were being starved, beaten, and forced to perform on camera between acts of torture. And Case 2? Even worse. A digital gold rush where investors were promised millions, only to watch their money vanish into thin air while the creator laughed from behind a screen. These aren't just crimes. They're calculated betrayals disguised as content. Let's start with Case 1. Case 1. It's Sliker, Abraham Muhammad. It was supposed to be a community built on trust. For years, Abraham Muhammad, known online as It's Sliker, cultivated a loyal following on Twitch, streaming everything from FIFA gameplay to casual conversations that felt like catching up with an old friend. His viewers didn't just watch him, they believed in him. They laughed at his jokes, defended him in comment sections, and when he reached out privately with a desperate plea for help, they opened their wallets without hesitation. That trust, that unspoken bond between creator and community, became the foundation of one of the most personal betrayals in streaming history. The requests started small. A few $100s here, 1,000 there. It's Sliker would slide into DMs with the same story. A family emergency, a frozen bank account, a temporary cash flow problem that just needed a quick bridge loan. He promised repayment within days, sometimes hours. And because his victims weren't strangers, they were fans, friends, people who felt they knew him, they said yes. One after another, they handed over money they'd saved, money they needed, money they trusted him to return. But Abraham Muhammad wasn't facing a crisis. He was feeding an addiction that had already consumed everything he had. Behind the friendly streams and relatable persona was a gambling addict spiraling out of control. Every dollar he borrowed went straight into online casinos and sports betting platforms, chasing losses that only grew larger with each desperate wager. He wasn't planning to pay anyone back because he genuinely believed the next bet would be the one that fixed everything. The next spin, the next match, the next hand. It was always just one win away. But that win never came. Instead, the debt piled up, spreading through his community like a slow-moving plague. Victims began comparing notes in private Discord servers, realizing they weren't alone. The amounts were staggering: 50,000, 100,000, some estimates pushing closer to $300,000 borrowed from individuals who thought they were helping a friend. When the truth finally surfaced in 2022, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Fellow streamers confronted him publicly. Victims shared screenshots of their conversations, laying bare the manipulation and lies. It's Sliker issued apologies, admitted to his gambling addiction, and promised to make things right. Some of the larger creators in the space even organized a charity stream to help repay his victims, raising over $200,000 in a single day. But the money was only part of the damage. The real wound was trust, irreparably shattered across an entire community that had believed in him. What makes this case so insidious isn't just the scale of the theft. It's the intimacy of it. Abraham Muhammad didn't hack accounts or run a faceless scam. He looked his victims in the eye, digital though it was, and weaponized their kindness. He turned friendship into currency and community into collateral. And even now, with partial repayments made and public confessions recorded, one question lingers in the minds of everyone he touched. How many others are still out there, too ashamed to come forward, still waiting for a repayment that will never arrive? Case 2. Ice Poseidon, Paul Danino. March 2022. Paul Danino, better known as Ice Poseidon, stood at the center of a digital gold rush. His brand, built on chaotic IRL streams and a cult-like following, had evolved beyond entertainment. Now he was pitching an investment opportunity, a cryptocurrency called CX Coin, named after his own streaming network, CX Network. The promise was simple: get in early, watch your investment multiply, and be part of something revolutionary. Thousands of his fans, many of them young and financially inexperienced, saw this as their lottery ticket. They pooled their savings, their student loans, even money borrowed from family, and poured it into CX Coin, believing Paul Danino would never let them down. They were wrong. CX Coin launched with all the hallmarks of legitimacy. There were white papers, promotional videos, and Paul himself hyping it across every platform he controlled. The coin's value spiked initially, feeding the frenzy. Investors watched their portfolios balloon on paper, convinced they'd made the right call. But behind the scenes, something far more sinister was unfolding. Paul and his team allegedly began selling off their own holdings, flooding the market with supply while retail investors kept buying. It's a maneuver known in the crypto world as a rug pull, a calculated exit scam where the creators drain liquidity and vanish, leaving everyone else holding worthless tokens. When the crash came, it was sudden and catastrophic. Coin's value plummeted to near zero almost overnight. Investors who'd bought in at the peak lost everything. The Discord servers and subreddits dedicated to the project exploded with panic and rage. People shared screenshots of their losses, 10,000, 50,000, some claiming six figures gone in a matter of hours. And Paul, he went silent. No explanations, no apologies, just a conspicuous absence as his community burned around him. The man who'd built his career on transparency and constant interaction had vanished the moment accountability came knocking. The aftermath was ugly. Former fans turned investigators, combing through blockchain records to trace where the money went. They found wallet transfers, suspicious sell-offs, patterns that looked less like market volatility and more like orchestrated theft. Paul eventually resurfaced, denying any wrongdoing and claiming he too had lost money in the crash. But the evidence was damning, and the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Fellow content creators distanced themselves. Sponsors pulled out. The CX network, once a symbol of his empire, became a monument to betrayal. What's particularly cruel about this case is the demographic of the victims. These weren't seasoned traders or wealthy speculators. They were kids, teenagers, young adults who'd grown up watching Paul Danino's streams, who trusted him because he felt like one of them. He weaponized that parasocial relationship, turning loyalty into profit and fandom into financial ruin. And while some managed to recoup small portions of their losses through legal threats and public pressure, the vast majority walked away with nothing but a harsh lesson about the cost of misplaced trust. To this day, Paul Danino continues to stream, though his audience is a fraction of what it once was. The CX Coin scandal remains unresolved in any legal sense, with no criminal charges filed and no restitution paid. The only justice his victims received was watching his reputation crumble in real time, a cautionary tale etched into the internet's permanent record. Case 3. Kanghua Run, Reset. Barcelona, 2017. Kanghua Run, a Chinese-born YouTuber operating under the name Reset, had built his channel on prank content, the kind of boundary-pushing stunts that racked up millions of views by making people uncomfortable. His formula was simple: find a target, humiliate them on camera, and let the ad revenue roll in. But on one particular afternoon in January, Ren crossed a line that would transform him from internet provocateur into convicted criminal, setting a legal precedent that would echo across the content creation world for years to come. His target was a homeless man in his 50s, someone the local community knew by face if not by name. The man was vulnerable in every sense: no stable housing, no support system, existing on the margins of a city that had largely forgotten him. To Kanghua Run, he was perfect, not as a human being worthy of dignity, but as content. Ren approached him with an offer, 20 euros in exchange for eating Oreo cookies. It seemed harmless enough, and the man, likely desperate for any bit of cash or food, agreed without hesitation. What he didn't know was that Ren had replaced the cream filling with toothpaste, turning a simple snack into a toxic prank designed to make him sick. The video shows exactly what you'd expect, and worse. The homeless man bites into the cookies, his face immediately contorting as the taste registers. He tries to spit it out, confusion turning to distress as his body reacts to ingesting a substance never meant to be consumed in those quantities. He begins to vomit violently on the street while Ren films, laughing, narrating the spectacle for his audience like it's the punchline to a joke. There's no concern, no moment where the camera stops and humanity kicks in. Just cold, calculated exploitation dressed up as entertainment. Rin uploaded the footage to his channel, where it quickly racked up views and engagement, his comment section filling with a mix of horrified condemnation and disturbing encouragement. But this time, the backlash extended beyond angry tweets and dislikes. The video reached Spanish authorities, who launched an investigation into what many were calling a clear case of abuse. The homeless man was located and received medical attention, though the psychological damage of being publicly humiliated and poisoned for sport is harder to quantify. Rin was arrested in February 2017, and what followed was a legal battle that would redefine how courts viewed online content creation. His defense argued it was just a prank, a joke that went too far, but nothing criminal. Prosecutors saw it differently. This was premeditated harm against a vulnerable person, recorded and monetized for profit. In May 2019, a Barcelona court found Canghua Rin guilty of a crime against moral integrity. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison, later suspended, and ordered to pay 20,000 euros to his victim. But the most significant part of the ruling wasn't the jail time or the fine. It was the ban. Rin was prohibited from uploading content to YouTube or any social media platform for 5 years, marking one of the first times a court had legally barred someone from content creation as punishment for crimes committed on camera. It was a landmark decision, a recognition that digital platforms weren't consequence-free zones, and that "it's just a prank" wasn't a legal shield. The case sent shockwaves through the YouTube community, particularly among creators who'd built careers on pushing ethical boundaries. It raised uncomfortable questions about where entertainment ends and exploitation begins, and whether clout and clicks justified cruelty. Rin's channel was eventually deleted, his subscriber count and view metrics erased like they'd never existed. But the video of that homeless man vomiting on a Barcelona street lives on in re-uploads and news coverage, a permanent record of the moment a prank became a crime. And for the victim, a man whose name we still don't know, the 20 euros and the toothpaste-filled cookies remain the price of becoming someone else's viral moment. Case 4. Gene Portmanov. August 2017. Charlottesville, Virginia was suffering through a brutal heat wave, the kind where stepping outside feels like walking into a furnace and the air itself seems too thick to breathe. Most people were staying indoors, huddled near fans and air conditioning, waiting for the temperature to drop. But Gene Portmanov, a 28-year-old Twitch streamer known for marathon broadcasting sessions, was doing what he always did, sitting in front of his computer, streaming for hours on end, chasing the grind that defines so many content creators trying to build an audience in an oversaturated market. He was known for his endurance, his ability to stream longer than most, to outlast the competition through sheer willpower. On that particular day, that willpower would kill him. Gene wasn't streaming from a professional setup with climate control and ergonomic furniture. He was broadcasting from a small, poorly ventilated room where the heat had nowhere to go. His viewers watched as he played World of Warcraft, his usual game of choice, engaging with chat and maintaining the energy required to keep people watching. But as the hours ticked by, something began to change. Gene started to look visibly uncomfortable, sweating heavily, his responses slowing down. Chat noticed. Messages began flooding in, asking if he was okay, telling him to take a break, to drink water, to step away from the screen. He brushed them off with the same dedication that had built his modest following. Just a little longer, just one more hour, just until he hit his streaming goal for the day. By the time Gene collapsed, he'd been streaming for approximately 22 hours straight in a room that had effectively become an oven. His body, already pushed past reasonable limits by the sheer length of the session, couldn't regulate its temperature anymore. Heatstroke set in, a silent killer that shuts down organs and cooks the brain from the inside. His viewers watched in real time as he slumped forward, the stream continuing to broadcast his motionless body to an audience that was now screaming in chat for someone, anyone, to call for help. It took nearly an hour before emergency services were contacted and arrived at his home. By then, it was too late. Gene Portmanov was pronounced dead, a victim of environmental factors and a culture that glorifies self-destruction in the name of content. The autopsy confirmed what everyone already suspected: extreme hyperthermia, brought on by prolonged exposure to excessive heat combined with physical exhaustion and likely dehydration. But the medical report couldn't capture the full picture. It couldn't explain why a 28-year-old man felt compelled to stream himself to death, why taking a break felt like failure, why the pressure to perform for an audience, no matter how small, outweighed basic self-preservation. Jean's death became a grim talking point in the streaming community, a cautionary tale shared in Discord servers and Reddit threads about the dangers of the grind, the toxicity of hustle culture, and the dark side of parasocial relationships, where viewers demand content and creators feel obligated to deliver no matter the cost. What makes this case so tragic is its preventability. There was no villain, no malicious actor, no crime in the traditional sense. Just a man, a computer, a heatwave, and a system that rewards endurance over health. Jean's Twitch channel remained active for months after his death, his last stream still archived, a digital tombstone that viewers could visit and rewatch, seeing the exact moment the grind became fatal. Eventually, the channel was taken down, but by then the story had already spread, a stark reminder that subscriber counts and viewer metrics aren't worth a human life. Jean Pormanov's death didn't lead to policy changes or platform reforms. Twitch didn't implement mandatory break reminders or health warnings for marathon streams. The content creation machine kept churning, and streamers kept pushing themselves to dangerous limits in pursuit of relevance. His name faded from the discourse, replaced by newer tragedies and fresher scandals. But for those who were there, who watched him collapse in real time, the memory lingers. And the question remains unanswered. How many more Jean Pormanovs are out there right now, streaming through exhaustion and illness, convinced that stopping means losing everything? Case 5. Melstroy, Andrei Burim. Moscow, 2020. Andrei Burim had built his empire on chaos. Known online as Melstroy, he'd carved out a profitable niche in Russia's streaming ecosystem by doing what most creators wouldn't dare, pushing every boundary, breaking every rule, and turning outrage into currency. His streams were unpredictable, often violent, always controversial. He'd throw money at strangers on the street, destroy expensive items for shock value, and engage in stunts that blurred the line between entertainment and public disturbance. His audience loved him for it, feeding him donations and subscribers with every escalation. But on one particular night in May, Melstroy crossed a line that even his most devoted fans couldn't defend, broadcasting an act of violence so brutal it would land him in court and cement his legacy as a cautionary tale about unchecked digital power. The victim was Elena Efremova, a model and aspiring influencer who'd agreed to appear on Melstroy's stream. It was supposed to be a collaboration, a chance for her to gain exposure to his massive audience while providing him with fresh content. The stream started normally enough. Banter, games, the usual format his viewers expected. But as the night progressed and alcohol flowed, the atmosphere shifted. An argument erupted over something trivial, the kind of disagreement that in any normal setting would end with someone leaving or cooling off. Instead, Melstroy stood up, walked over to where Elena sat, and punched her directly in the face with enough force to knock her off her chair. The stream didn't cut. The cameras kept rolling as Elena lay on the floor, blood pouring from her nose, clearly disoriented and in pain. Melstroy didn't rush to help her. He didn't apologize or show any immediate remorse. Instead, he stood there, seemingly processing what he'd just done while his live chat exploded in real time. Some viewers cheered, treating it like another Melstroy spectacle. Others spammed messages of horror and disgust, demanding he call an ambulance. The donation alerts kept chiming, a grotesque soundtrack to a woman's assault being monetized in real time. Eventually, the stream ended, but the damage, both physical and digital, was already done. Clips of the punch spread across Russian social media within hours, turning a single moment of violence into a viral nightmare. Elena Efremova was hospitalized with a concussion and facial injuries. Medical reports documented the severity of the assault, and photographs of her bruised and swollen face circulated online, contradicting any attempt by Melstroy to downplay what had happened. Russian authorities, facing public pressure and undeniable video evidence, launched a criminal investigation. Melstroy was charged with battery, and for the first time in his career, the consequences extended beyond platform bans and temporary backlash. He was facing real jail time, and the courtroom wasn't filled with adoring fans throwing money at him. It was filled with prosecutors presenting evidence of premeditated violence broadcast to thousands. In December 2020, a Moscow court found Andrei Burin guilty of intentionally inflicting harm and sentenced him to 6 months of restricted freedom, along with mandatory community service and a hefty fine. He was also ordered to pay Elena 1 million rubles in compensation, roughly $13,000 at the time. But the legal consequences were only part of his punishment. Major platforms began distancing themselves from him, banning his accounts and demonetizing his content. Sponsors dropped him. Fellow creators who'd once collaborated with him publicly condemned the assault, afraid that association would tarnish their own brands. Melstroy's empire, built on chaos and controversy, began to crumble under the weight of accountability. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just the violence itself, it's the ecosystem that enabled it. Melstroy had spent years conditioning his audience to expect escalation, to reward extremity with attention and money. The punch wasn't an aberration. It was the logical endpoint of a content model that glorified aggression and treated human dignity as disposable. And even after the conviction, even after the bans and the fines, Melstroy eventually returned to streaming on alternative platforms, finding audiences willing to overlook his criminal record in exchange for the same chaotic content that put Elena Efremova in a hospital bed. The cycle continues, and the only question that remains is whether the next victim will be lucky enough to survive their 15 minutes in Melstroy's spotlight. Case 6. Austin Jones. June 2017. Austin Jones was living the dream that millions of aspiring musicians chase, but few ever catch. The 24-year-old singer-songwriter from Bloomingdale, Illinois had built a substantial following on YouTube, amassing over 500,000 subscribers who tuned in for his pop-punk covers and original songs. His aesthetic was wholesome, approachable, a boy-next-door charm that resonated particularly well with teenage girls who saw him as talented, relatable, and safe. He engaged with his fans constantly, responding to comments, hosting live streams, and cultivating the kind of parasocial intimacy that turns casual viewers into devoted followers. But behind the carefully curated image of the friendly musician was a predator who'd been systematically exploiting that trust for years, turning his platform into a hunting ground. The pattern was consistent and calculated. Jones would identify young fans, often girls between the ages of 14 and 15, and begin private conversations through Facebook or direct messages. He'd start friendly, complimenting their support, making them feel special and noticed by someone they admired. Then, slowly, he'd steer the conversations towards sexual territory. He'd ask them to prove they were his biggest fans by sending him videos, specifically, videos of themselves dancing provocatively, twerking, touching themselves, all while saying his name and proclaiming their loyalty. He framed it as harmless fun, a private interaction between creator and superfan. In reality, he was grooming minors to produce child sexual abuse material, using his fame and their devotion as leverage. The girls complied because they trusted him. They believed that Austin Jones, the singer who made them feel seen, wouldn't ask for anything wrong. Some sent multiple videos, escalating in explicitness based on his requests and positive reinforcement. He'd praise them, tell them they were his favorites, make them feel like they had a special connection. What they didn't realize was that they weren't special at all. They were part of a pattern, one of many victims being manipulated through identical scripts. Jones allegedly collected these videos for years, building a library of abuse material while continuing to post cheerful covers and inspirational messages to his public audience. The disconnect between his public persona and his private actions was staggering. The investigation began when one victim's mother discovered the messages and immediately contacted authorities. The FBI got involved, and what they uncovered was extensive. Forensic analysis of Jones's devices revealed conversations with at least 6 victims, along with the explicit videos they'd sent. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. In June 2017, federal agents arrested Austin Jones at Chicago O'Hare International Airport as he was returning from London. He was charged with 2 counts of production of child pornography, crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences and register offenders for life. His YouTube channel was immediately suspended, his music pulled from streaming platforms, and his carefully constructed career evaporated overnight. Jones initially maintained his innocence, But as the case progressed and more evidence emerged, he changed his plea. In February 2019, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of production of child sexual abuse material. The sentencing hearing in August of that year was devastating. Prosecutors presented victim impact statements from the girls he'd exploited, many of whom described lasting trauma, broken trust, and a sense of shame that persisted years after the abuse. The judge showed no leniency. Austin Jones was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, with 15 years of supervised release to follow. He was also required to register as a sex offender, a designation that would follow him for the rest of his life. What's particularly insidious about this case is how Jones weaponized the very thing that made him successful. His music, his approachability, his engagement, all of it was authentic enough to build genuine fame, but it also served as the perfect cover for predatory behavior. He understood that teenage girls were his primary audience, and instead of honoring that trust, he exploited it in the most vile way possible. And the tragedy extends beyond the known victims. How many others never came forward, too ashamed or scared to admit what happened? How many videos are still out there, permanent records of abuse that can never be fully erased? Austin Jones is currently serving his sentence in federal prison, scheduled for release in the mid-2020s. But for the girls whose childhoods he stole for his own gratification, the sentence never ends. 7. Michelle Hobson. Maricopa, Arizona, March 2019. From the outside, the Hobson household looked like a content creator's success story. Michelle Hobson, a mother of 7, ran a wildly popular YouTube channel called Fantastic Adventures, featuring her adopted children acting out elaborate storylines, skits, and adventures that had amassed over 800,000 subscribers and generated millions of views. The videos were cheerful, colorful, seemingly innocent entertainment that parents felt comfortable letting their own children watch. Ads rolled, sponsorships came in, and the Hobson family appeared to be living proof that with creativity and dedication, anyone could build an empire on YouTube. But behind the camera, away from the bright lights and scripted smiles, those children were living in a nightmare that would eventually become one of the most disturbing cases of familial abuse in the platform's history. The truth began to unravel when one of Hobson's biological daughters, who no longer lived in the home, reported concerns to authorities after receiving alarming information from her younger siblings. What she described sounded impossible: systematic torture disguised as content creation, a household where childhood had been replaced with forced labor and punishment so severe it left permanent scars. Police arrived at the Hobson residence on March 15th with a search warrant, unsure of what they'd find. What they discovered was worse than anything they'd anticipated. The 7 children, ranging in age from 2 to 15, were malnourished, covered in bruises, and visibly terrified. The house itself told a story of control and cruelty. Pepper spray canisters used as punishment tools, closets that had been converted into makeshift cells, and a disturbing lack of food despite the family's substantial YouTube income. The children's testimonies painted a horrifying picture of life under Michelle Hobson's rule. They described being forced to film for hours on end, sometimes up to 12-hour sessions without breaks, food, or water. If they forgot lines, showed the wrong emotion, or failed to perform to her standards, the punishments were brutal. Hobson would beat them with belts and hangers, spray pepper spray directly into their mouths and eyes, and lock them in closets for extended periods as discipline. One child reported being held underwater in a bathtub until they nearly drowned. Another described being forced to stand in painful positions for hours while Hobson filmed them, their suffering becoming content that would later be edited out before upload. The abuse wasn't random. It was calculated, designed to ensure the children remained compliant performers who could generate the content that funded Hobson's lifestyle. Medical examinations confirmed the abuse. Doctors found evidence of malnutrition, untreated injuries, and developmental delays consistent with prolonged neglect and trauma. The children were immediately removed from the home and placed in protective custody, while Michelle Hobson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, child molestation, and kidnapping. The Fantastic Adventures channel was swiftly deleted by YouTube, erasing years of content that had collectively earned an estimated tens of thousands of dollars per month. But the videos themselves lived on in archives and re-uploads, a permanent record of children smiling and laughing on camera while being systematically tortured off it. As the case progressed through the legal system, more disturbing details emerged. Hobson had allegedly been planning to monetize her situation even further, exploring options to sell her story to media outlets and positioning herself as a misunderstood mother rather than an abuser. She denied all wrongdoing, claiming her discipline methods were necessary to manage difficult children and that the abuse allegations were exaggerated. The evidence, however, was overwhelming. Child Protective Services reports, medical records, and the children's own testimonies created an undeniable narrative of sustained cruelty. Hobson was held on a $1 million bond, deemed a danger to the community and a flight risk. But justice, in the traditional sense, never came. In December 2019, while awaiting trial, Michelle Hobson suffered a severe medical episode and was hospitalized. She remained in declining health for months, never regaining the capacity to stand trial. On February 26, 2020, she died in custody, taking with her any possibility of the children receiving closure through a conviction. The case was closed, the charges dismissed due to her death, and the Hobson children were left to rebuild their lives without ever seeing their abuser face full accountability. The legacy of Fantastic Adventures remains a chilling reminder that subscriber counts and view metrics can hide horrors, and that the cheerful faces on screen don't always tell the full story of what happens when the camera stops recording. Case 8. Jodi Hildebrandt. Ivins, Utah, August 2023. Jodi Hildebrandt had built her career on claiming to help people. A licensed clinical mental health counselor with decades of experience, she positioned herself as an expert in family dynamics, addiction recovery, and what she called truth-based therapy, a rigid framework of personal accountability and extreme consequences for perceived moral failings. Through her company, Connections Classroom, she'd counseled hundreds of families, hosted seminars, and developed a following among conservative communities seeking strict, faith-based approaches to parenting and mental health. But beneath the professional credentials and therapeutic language was a philosophy so extreme, so punitive, that when paired with the wrong partner, it would become the framework for one of the most disturbing child abuse cases Utah had ever prosecuted. That partner was Ruby Frank, a mother of 6 who'd risen to fame through her YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, documenting her family's daily life through a lens of strict discipline and traditional values. Ruby and Jodi's relationship began as counselor and client, but it quickly evolved into something far more collaborative and dangerous. Jodi's therapeutic methods, which included isolation from family members deemed distortions, extensive confessional journaling, and harsh consequences for even minor infractions, aligned perfectly with Ruby's increasingly authoritarian parenting style. Together, they created an environment where discipline crossed into torture, where children were systematically starved, bound, and psychologically destroyed in the name of teaching them truth and accountability. Jodi wasn't just enabling Ruby's abuse. She was architecting it, providing the ideological framework and therapeutic justification for cruelty. The abuse took place primarily in Jodi's Ivins home, where 2 of Ruby's children, her 12-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter, had been placed under what was framed as therapeutic intervention. The reality was imprisonment. The children were denied adequate food, forced to perform manual labor in the Utah heat, and subjected to punishments that included being bound with ropes, having their wounds covered with cayenne pepper and honey to inflict pain, and being told that their suffering was necessary for their spiritual salvation. Jodi Hildebrandt personally participated in and directed much of this abuse, her clinical training twisted into a tool for justifying the unjustifiable. She told the children they were possessed by demons, that their physical bodies needed to be broken to save their souls, and that any resistance was evidence of their moral corruption requiring even harsher intervention. The case broke open on August 30, 2023, when Ruby's 12-year-old son escaped through a window and ran to a neighbor's house, emaciated and with duct tape still wrapped around his ankles and wrists. The neighbor immediately called 911, and responding officers were shocked by what they found. A child so malnourished he appeared skeletal, covered in open wounds that had clearly been left untreated for weeks, and displaying signs of severe psychological trauma. Police rushed to Jodi Hildebrandt's home, where they found Ruby's 10-year-old daughter in similar condition, along with evidence of the systematic abuse both children had endured. Journals documented the punishments in disturbing detail, written in both Jody's and Ruby's handwriting, treating torture as therapeutic progress notes. Jody Hildebrandt was arrested alongside Ruby Frank that same day, both charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. The community was stunned. Hildebrandt had been a respected professional, someone parents had trusted with their most vulnerable family issues. Now, those same families began questioning what had happened in their own sessions, whether the extreme methods Jody had recommended had crossed similar lines. Connections Classroom immediately shut down, and multiple former clients came forward with their own stories of Jody's harsh tactics, painting a picture of a counselor who'd spent years operating outside ethical boundaries, using her credentials to legitimize abuse as therapy. In December 2023, facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of decades in prison, Jody Hildebrandt pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree felony aggravated child abuse. Her plea deal included acknowledging her role in the systematic torture of the Frank children and agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors. On February 20, 2024, she was sentenced to 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years, the same sentence Ruby Frank received. The Utah Board of Pardons would ultimately determine how long she'd actually serve, but the minimum was guaranteed: 4 years behind bars for a woman who'd spent her career claiming to heal families while secretly destroying them. What makes Jody Hildebrandt's role in this case so disturbing is the professional authority she wielded. She wasn't an untrained parent acting on impulse. She was a licensed therapist who understood child development, trauma, and the legal boundaries of discipline. She crossed those boundaries deliberately, weaponizing her knowledge to inflict maximum harm while maintaining a veneer of therapeutic legitimacy. And the question that haunts everyone who's examined this case is simple: how many other children suffered under her methods before the Frank case finally exposed her? The licensing board is investigating. Former clients are seeking answers. But for the 2 children who escaped her home with rope burns and starvation-induced organ damage, those answers came too late. Case 9. Ruby Frank. December 2015. Ruby Frank uploaded the first video to her YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, introducing the world to her family, herself, her husband Kevin, and their 6 children living what appeared to be an idyllic life in Springville, Utah. The channel's premise was simple: document the daily adventures, challenges, and joys of raising a large family through a lens of traditional values, strict routines, and unwavering parental authority. Early videos showed birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and the organized chaos of managing 6 kids under one roof. Viewers tuned in by the hundreds of thousands, many drawn to Ruby's no-nonsense approach to parenting and her willingness to enforce consequences that other parents might shy away from. She presented herself as the antidote to permissive modern parenting, a mother unafraid to be the authority figure her children needed. But as the years progressed and the subscriber count climbed past 2 million, that authority curdled into something far darker: a regime of control, deprivation, and systematic abuse that would eventually land her in prison and destroy the family she'd built her brand around. The warning signs were visible to anyone paying attention, scattered throughout years of uploaded content like breadcrumbs leading to inevitable tragedy. Ruby filmed herself sending her 6-year-old daughter to school without lunch as punishment for forgetting to pack it herself, telling viewers that natural consequences were the best teacher. She documented taking her son's bedroom away for 7 months, forcing him to sleep on a bean bag as discipline for a prank. She canceled Christmas one year, filming her children's disappointment and framing it as a lesson in gratitude and obedience. Comment sections filled with concern, criticism, and outright accusations of abuse, but Ruby dismissed the backlash as interference from people who didn't understand real parenting. She doubled down, her methods growing harsher, her justifications more elaborate, her belief in her own righteousness apparently unshakable. Behind the scenes, away from the carefully edited vlogs, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ruby's marriage to Kevin fractured, and he eventually moved out, later claiming he'd been manipulated and alienated from his own children through what he described as cult-like control. Ruby's partnership with Jody Hildebrandt intensified, and with it came an escalation in the abuse masked as discipline. Two of her children, her 12-year-old son, Russell, and 10-year-old daughter, Eve, became the primary targets of what Ruby and Jody framed as therapeutic intervention but was in reality systematic torture. The children were moved to Jody's home in Ivins, isolated from their siblings, and subjected to punishments that went far beyond anything ever hinted at in the YouTube videos. They were starved to the point of medical crisis, denied water in the scorching Utah summer heat, forced to work outdoors for hours without breaks, and bound with ropes when they resisted or tried to rest. Ruby's justification for the abuse, detailed in journals seized by police, was rooted in a distorted belief system that Jody had helped cultivate. She believed her children were possessed by demons, that their physical suffering was necessary to save their souls, that breaking their bodies and spirits was an act of love that would ultimately deliver them from evil. She documented Russell's weight loss, Eve's injuries, and their deteriorating physical conditions with clinical detachment, treating their suffering as evidence of therapeutic progress rather than criminal abuse. When Russell became so weak he could barely stand, Ruby didn't seek medical help. She increased the punishments, convinced that his weakness was spiritual resistance that needed to be crushed. August 30th, 2023. Everything collapsed when Russell Frank escaped through a window and stumbled to a neighbor's house. His emaciated body covered in wounds, duct tape still clinging to his raw ankles and wrists. The neighbor's 911 call was frantic, describing a child who looked like he'd been held captive for months. Police responded immediately, and what they found at Jody Hildebrandt's home confirmed the worst. Even similarly horrific condition, evidence of prolonged starvation and abuse throughout the property, and journals that documented the torture in Ruby's own handwriting. Ruby was arrested that same day, charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. Her YouTube empire imploding in real time as news of the arrest spread across social media. The evidence against her was devastating and undeniable. Medical reports showed both children were severely malnourished, with Russell weighing just 82 pounds at 12 years old, and Eve showing signs of muscle wasting and dehydration, so severe she required immediate hospitalization. Wounds on their bodies were infected, some treated with cayenne pepper and honey in what Ruby claimed was a home remedy, but doctors recognized as deliberate infliction of pain. The children's statements to investigators painted a picture of months-long suffering, of being told they were evil and deserved punishment, of begging for food and water while Ruby stood over them, unmoved. Former viewers of 8 Passengers began combing through old videos with fresh eyes, finding moments they'd previously excused or overlooked, realizing that the abuse hadn't started when the cameras went off. It had been there all along, just carefully framed as strict parenting. Ruby Frank initially maintained her innocence, but as her legal team reviewed the evidence, the journals, the medical reports, the children's testimonies, the impossibility of mounting a defense became clear. In December 2023, she accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 4 counts of second-degree felony aggravated child abuse in exchange for the prosecution dropping 2 additional charges. On February 20th, 2024, standing before a judge in a St. George courtroom, Ruby Frank was sentenced to 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years, the same sentence Jody Hildebrandt received. The judge's remarks were scathing, noting that Ruby had betrayed the most fundamental duty of a parent and that her actions represented not discipline but torture. The Utah Board of Pardons would ultimately decide how long she'd serve, but the minimum was guaranteed, 4 years for each count. No possibility of early release without board approval. The 8 Passengers channel was deleted, its entire archive of family vlogs erased from public view, though copies and reaction videos preserved fragments of Ruby's content across the internet. Kevin Frank filed for divorce, publicly stating he'd been deceived and manipulated, that he'd lost access to his children and had been excluded from their lives as Ruby and Jody's partnership deepened. The 4 Frank children who weren't directly subjected to the worst abuse at Jody's home were placed in the care of family members, beginning the long process of therapy and recovery. Russell and Eve, the 2 survivors of the Ivins house, faced an even harder road: physical rehabilitation, psychological treatment for trauma, and the knowledge that their own mother had starved and tortured them while believing she was saving their souls. Case 10. Stas Reflay, Stanislav Reshetniak. Ivanovka, Kazakhstan, December 2020. Winter had arrived early and brutal in this remote village northeast of the capital, the kind of cold that seeps into bones and turns exposed skin numb within minutes. Inside a cramped apartment, Stanislav Reshetniak, known online as Stas Reflay, was preparing for another stream. At 30 years old, he'd carved out a niche in the darkest corner of Russian-language live streaming, a subgenre known as trash streaming, where the entire point was degradation, humiliation, and pushing human endurance past any reasonable limit. His audience didn't tune in for gaming or entertainment in the traditional sense. They came to watch people suffer, to participate in that suffering through donations that triggered increasingly severe punishments, and to test how far a desperate streamer would go for money. On this particular night, they would get their answer, and it would cross from exploitation into homicide. Valentina, Valya, Grigorieva was Reflay's girlfriend, though calling her that implies a relationship built on anything resembling equality or care. She was more accurately described as his captive, a woman trapped in an abusive situation who appeared regularly on his streams as the primary target of his cruelty. She was visibly pregnant during many broadcasts, which didn't stop Reflay from subjecting her to degrading challenges and physical abuse for his audience's amusement. On December 1st, Valya was part of the stream as usual, and the donations were rolling in with their attached demands. The viewers wanted escalation, something memorable, and Reflay delivered by announcing a challenge. If donations reached a certain threshold, he would make Valya stand outside in sub-zero temperatures wearing only underwear. The money came in quickly, and Reflay kept his promise. The stream showed everything. Valya, stripped down to her underwear, was forced outside into temperatures hovering around -15 degrees Celsius. The door locked behind her. Inside, Reflay sat warm and comfortable, monitoring the chat as donations continued to pour in, each one extending the time Valya had to endure the cold. Minutes passed. Viewers could see her through the window, standing in the snow, her body visibly shivering, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to conserve warmth. Some chat messages expressed concern, suggesting this had gone too far, but they were drowned out by others encouraging Reflay to keep her outside longer, to make it worse, to see what would happen if she stayed out there for an hour. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself with drama. It's a quiet killer that shuts the body down incrementally, and by the time Reflay finally brought Valya back inside, irreversible damage had already been done. When he dragged her back into the apartment, Valya was barely conscious, her skin mottled and pale, her breathing shallow and irregular. Instead of immediately calling for medical help, Reflay did what he always did. He kept streaming. He laid her down and attempted to warm her up, using methods that demonstrated a stunning ignorance of hypothermia treatment, including dousing her with cold water, which only accelerated her body's shutdown. The chat was in chaos now, with viewers screaming at him to call an ambulance, but Reflay seemed more concerned with the stream's momentum than Valya's life. He turned the situation into content, asking viewers whether he should call emergency services or try to handle it himself, monetizing her medical crisis in real time. The donations told him to wait, to see if she'd recover on her own, and he listened to them instead of his conscience. Valya never regained consciousness. Hours passed with her lying motionless on the floor, while Reflay continued to broadcast, occasionally checking her pulse and reporting her status to the viewers like she was a science experiment rather than a human being dying in front of him. By the time he finally called for an ambulance, likely realizing that her death on stream might have legal consequences he couldn't ignore, it was far too late. Paramedics arrived to find Valentina Grigorieva dead, her body temperature so low that resuscitation was impossible. The cause of death was ruled as hypothermia, with contributing factors of alcohol intoxication and the extreme cold exposure. She was only 28 years old, and she died because an audience paid a streamer to see how much suffering she could endure. The backlash was immediate and international. Clips of the stream spread across social media, sparking outrage and calls for Reflay's arrest. Russian authorities, under pressure from public outcry and the undeniable video evidence of negligent homicide broadcast live to thousands, took him into custody within days. He was charged with inflicting grievous bodily harm resulting in death, a crime that carried a potential sentence of up to 15 years in prison. During interrogation, Reflay showed little remorse, claiming he didn't think the cold would actually kill her, that it was just part of the show, that his viewers were the ones who demanded it, so they were equally responsible. His defense attempted to frame him as a victim of internet culture, someone pushed to extremes by an audience that rewarded depravity. But the prosecution's case was airtight. He locked a woman outside in deadly cold, ignored her deteriorating condition, delayed medical intervention, and filmed all of it for profit. In September 2021, a Russian court found Stanislav Reshetniak guilty and sentenced him to 6 years in a penal colony. Many felt the sentence was too lenient given that he'd essentially live-streamed a murder, but Russian legal standards for intent and negligence resulted in the lesser charge and corresponding punishment. The streaming platform he'd used permanently banned trash streaming content, implementing policies against any broadcasts involving physical harm or degradation. But the damage was done, and the precedent was set. There existed an audience willing to pay for someone's death, and streamers desperate or depraved enough to provide it. What makes this case the most chilling on this list is the transactional nature of the killing. Valentina Grigorieva didn't die because of a crime of passion, a robbery gone wrong, or even traditional domestic violence. She died because viewers sent money to make it happen, and a streamer valued those donations more than her life. Every ping of a new payment was another minute added to her death sentence. Every encouraging comment in the chat another vote for her suffering. The stream was a collective act of cruelty, a digital coliseum where thousands watched a woman freeze to death and some actively cheered it on. Reflay is currently serving his sentence, but the viewers who funded Valia's death faced no consequences. Their usernames are lost to anonymous accounts and deleted profiles, their donations untraceable, their participation in a homicide as unpunished as it was undeniable. And somewhere in the archives of the internet, in dark corners where these things are preserved and traded, the footage still exists, a permanent record of the night a woman froze to death for content, and the world watched it happen in real time.